Yes, I have just hit record.
All right. Going live. It's Thursday, June 1st, 2023. I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
And this is the GeekNights Book Club. Tonight, we are talking about Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses. Leave a little pause there. So yeah, we're gonna do this show a couple weeks ago, but of course, I got sick, so here we are.
I'm still like 5% sick, maybe.
Nah,
It was only like a 2-day sickness.
I
took it yesterday off work, and that was it.
Yeah, I took a whole week off work for that cold. Well, that sinus infection. It was not a cold; it was bacterial. But that sucked. So luckily, I took some notes, so I'd remember to talk about the specific things I really got stuck in my craw reading this book. But I want to be very clear that one thing we're not going to do in this episode is get into much of the socio-political situation around this book. One, because we're not experts in it. Two, because that would be longer than the book club episode. And three, because at least for me, my opinion, I really want to engage with the novel as a novel, with one exception. Because maybe two, but the exception that really stood out to me is I always assumed and knew that this book, because of the portrayal of Muhammad and the ladies and the situation.
Muhammad's not in this book, but just a guy named Mahound.
Apparently, in many translations, it's even more ambiguous. He's just referred to as the messenger, and that's it. Like
Seems less ambiguous, but okay.
But but I guess I always sort of knew from learning history that was the driver of this specific fatwa. But what no one told me, and I never knew until I got to a certain part later in the book, when a certain imam appears, and that is definitely just a parody of Khomeini, and I'm pretty sure Khomeini was specifically personally mad about that, and that was probably the impetus for him more so than this over other books that transgress to a similar degree at the time. Like, I feel like that was a bigger part of that situation than what I learned in high school led me to believe.
Well, it could be. The way I saw it is like, if I was a religious fundamentalist, right? The part that we really believed, the part of this book that would make me the most mad, at least I'm guessing.
Yeah, because
right?
I can think of a few parts, but...
Right. But the part that I think might make such a person the most angry was the part where it was like, at first, Mahound was getting messages from the angel Gabriel.
Yep.
But then he was just sort of, anytime he wanted something, right? Saying, be like, do what I say. Why should we do what you say? Close my eyes. Gabriel just told me to. Now do it, right?
Yep.
It's like, there's that whole part where it's like just obviously portraying the prophet as just a liar who's making shit up to get his way.
With, of course, we'll get into the allegory of, was it the other way around? And it was the modern person using this internal metaphor of their idea of Muhammad to process their own traumas and interactions. But anyway, the other part that I could see was the specific nature of the fact that it was Indian Muslims portrayed primarily in the book, in the primary story, because that is where the original riots occurred, and the fatwa came after that.
Mm-hmm.
And it made, the cross-cultural part of that actually led to significant amounts of that anger early, because it intersected with an already persecuted in a different way from other Islamic communities situation. So there was a lot more going on there. And until I read this book, I didn't actually know that it was about Indian Muslims, as opposed, I didn't know that. I just knew very broad strokes about the story.
I knew nothing about the content of the actual novel till I read it. So
I knew.
When I was reading the first chapter, I was like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
Then eventually you realize what's going on. Like, it's a hijacking, about, pages in.
Yep.
Right.
And that is definitely talk about, of all the, there's some books you read where there's a slow build up, and then you're like, okay, I see where this book is going. But some books just come in and hit you over the head with a hammer of what the fuck's going on? Bam, 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 bam. And then you get through a chapter or two, and then you're like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. I see where we are. And I kind of like books that do that to me.
Starts like you're on a plane with these two dudes.
Yeah.
And it's like you understand that these two dudes who knew each other from somewhere and are on the plane and together. And it's sort of it's just murky, right?
Yep.
And then it's like usually you expect like a novel wants to grab people on the first page, right? That's what they always tell.
And it did grab me, but not in the normal way.
Right. But it's like, it's not until several pages in where it's like the clouds begin to clear and it's like, it's a hijacking and they're going to die immediately.
And also the way that opening scene was written just really struck me as that's where I recognized too, because I'd never read any of Salman Rushdie's works other than a couple of like essays and short articles and like interviews.
I don't remember. If I have, I don't remember this. So as far as I know, this is the only thing I've written.
So I guess I didn't expect, just not knowing the sheer amount of poetry and like the way the writing was. So it almost felt like, wait, there's some guys on a plane and then poetry exploded the plane. Like it felt like poems came in and things exploded. And it took me a while to figure out that wasn't an allegory or a metaphor, at least in that context.
Or was it?
Well, I would say reading it at first, like, wait, is this an allegory? Followed by, no, this is literally happening. Followed by, wait, this is a allegory by multiple steps. Followed like in the first chapter with, oh, so now they just fell to the ground and they're in London. Okay.
Right. So I don't know if there's like some actual, like if I would talk to like a literature professor and they would actually be able to define what the difference is between like fantasy and magical realism or any of those sorts of.
Wikipedia says this is in the genre of magical realism straight up for whatever that's worth.
So it's like, it takes place in the 80s.
Yep.
Right? At least the main plot takes place in the 80s, but there are also dream sequences which take place in the past,
all over the place
world.
One feels like it's in the 70s, like the one with the Aman, I'd say. One feels like it takes place in a vague period. One is definitely like the founding of Islam.
Yeah, and a few of them take place like in the different places on Earth at the same time. Right?
Well, the one with the Boyadere, the one with the the South American Nazi and that whole situation, like that era.
The pilgrimage takes place at the same time as the. Right?
Yeah.
But it's like, you can, in a lot of books that have dream sequences and things like that, you might be questioning like what's real, what's not real, or at least nothing's real. It's all a work of fiction. But like, but it's like within the world of the fiction, what's real and what's not real. And the thing is, it's like the whole thing could be not real if they died in the plane crash, which they could have, right? It's like, it
which
could all be some
extra great. And this is a credit to Salman Rushdie. Gabriel considers that is a possibility at multiple points in this book. Like he thinks to himself, like, did I die? Is it? I think Saladin actually does too when he's turning into a goat in that scene. I remember there's a moment where he's like, this is too absurd. I must have just died in that plane crash. And this is just like, maybe I'm in the hospital. That's got to be it. I'm in the hospital.
Yep. So these two dudes die in a plane crash. Who were these two dudes? You got Chamcha, Saladin. He's a guy who is a voice actor, right? And he's from India.
We'll get back to that. The fact that he's a voice actor is like super, super important to what this book is about.
Right, he's a super talented voice actor from India. But he's one of those people who, is an immigrant who is, I guess in modern day, you would consider him like a London weeb. Is there a word for that? Right? It's like, I think of like, the white dudes who go to Japan, right?
Yeah.
They're like, all in on Japan. Japan is the best. And they shun their.
Now, if this book were set today, he would be wearing a t-shirt with like a picture of Queen Victoria on it, unironically.
Yeah, or like, what's the, keep calm, whatever.
This is the kind of person who would like follow gossip of the royal family and like revere them.
Austin Powers' car.
Yeah.
It's like, he's that, right? So it's like, even though he's from India, it's like he changed his name to be less, ethnic, I guess, whatever word you want to use.
Yep.
Right.
But also in a way more ethnic in that he almost makes it like more the stereotype of what people would expect, which fit with it. There's a lot going on there.
Right. And then, so you got Gabriel. Now, Gabriel is sort of like, he's also an actor, right? But he's an actor in India, a movie actor. He appears on screen, right?
Not just a movie actor. He is like the biggest actor at the time. Like, he is in Indian cinema the most important and famous person, and to the fact that even globally he's well known.
But he's always in movies, he's always portraying like gods and heroes and legendary figures, right? And he is not even though he's is a worldly person, right? He is the opposite in that he has not thrown away his Indianness, right? But he's very not conservative. Like, he's getting with all the ladies and being all, Hollywood style, right? Yeah. So you got these two guys, and they're on a plane, which is hijacked.
And basically one of them metaphorically, allegorically, and literally becomes an angel, and one of them becomes a demon, though there's a little bit of an indication that they flipped at some point. Like that,
yeah, right. So that's the thing, is like, you look at both of them, and it's like, it's not clearly like, if you just look at these characters, there isn't a clear like, good guy, bad guy deal the way there might be in like, an anime where it's like, yes, the Gundam pilot is good and Char is bad, right?
Yep.
It's like,
I mean, they're
not like,
in a lot of ways, they're both kind of bad, with a big asterisk there, in that they both do a lot of shitty things, but the angel actually does more shitty things, I would say. Like, his crimes are arguably greater.
It's tough to say, right? But yeah, they each have positive, and also they have aspects that you can look at as laudable and aspects that you can look at as not so laudable, right? And the first thing that tips you off to who's good, who's bad, is after they crash, and they might be dead, but that doesn't matter, right? They're alive somehow. Only them two, no one else on the plane. You don't hear anything about anyone else who was on that plane.
Yep.
And they get rescued on some island or on a beach or something by some old lady.
It's like on a beach in the English coast somewhere, and that old lady's a whole thing. But
a very depopulated place, right? But basically the cops come, right? And the cops, when they arrive, arrest Chamcha for like being an illegal immigrant. Right?
And they totally ignore Gabriel. There's no difference between them except, and this is where the allegory and like the way this is portrayed gets murky and interesting and interwoven. Because on one hand, Gabriel's glowing in the book and has like almost a halo, and Saladin is starting to grow horns. So that is happening from the magical realism perspective.
Happening.
And his breath became sulfurous. That is a thing as well. But simultaneously, if you treat that as pure allegory, you've got Gabriel happens to go into the wardrobe of this woman's house and put on like an English smoking jacket, and Chamcha is too sick and doesn't get up right away. So when the cops come, they see two strangers who are clearly not white people, and the only difference between them is one of them looks like he should be there to their biased eyes, and one of them doesn't. So they arrest the one who's not wearing an English smoking jacket.
And Gabriel does nothing to speak up and save right Chamcha. He just stands there. He just lets the police, take him, and then as a result, Chamcha suffers greatly and now hates Gabriel a lot, right?
Which tries to kill him several times.
Right. He's like, fuck that guy. Right. He just let me get arrested, and I had to suffer with the cops, being pieces of shit and everything.
Yep. And it's very clear, like, if anyone's missing the super obvious lit crit, like, analysis conversation here, that a reading of this scene, and this reading is throughout the entire book, but this scene's such a good example of it. It is very clearly, because think about it, the voice actor gets arrested, the movie star doesn't, which also leads to who passes more in the dominant culture of the place they've immigrated to, and thus they're treated very differently. And that cements...
Chamcha is more of a person, he's a person like, of London in every way.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, he loves London food.
Like his spirit, he is more a Londoner than a lot of English people by birth, yet he looks more foreign to the white people, which ties back to the fact that there's a reason he was only ever allowed to be a voice actor. Meanwhile, Gabriel passes effectively more appearance-wise, yet he is much less of that spiritually and personally. Like he's got a whole other thing going on. It's not like they're opposites in that regard. Gabriel's a little more insane as a character than Chamcha, I think.
He gets more insane and less insane at different times.
Yep.
But he's definitely lost it.
Yeah.
Lost the plot.
But the way they're written is also just fantastic. Like their dialogue and like Chamcha, it's interesting how Chamcha's almost the more level-headed one most of the time. And that, like in the police car and a lot of scenes when weird stuff's happening, he is almost always like, wait, is this really happening or am I going crazy? What's going on? Gabriel definitely just rolls with it more before he has that revelation. And that happens repeatedly. Like he's less connected to humanity as a character than Chamcha is.
All right, so these two main characters, right, and their plot is like driving the rest of the story. It's like the thread that's holding everything else together. But there's basically several other smaller novels, right?
Yeah.
That are all linked in some way to them, a little bit at least, right? And that's, it's like it's this huge book. I guess not huge, but it's larger than most. It's not like a War and Peace deal, right? We finished it. It wasn't easier to read than Tale of Genji.
Honestly, I blew through it just because it was compelling. Yeah. Like it was a good read.
Yeah, by several, orders of magnitude, right? But it's like, it's not one of those books where he's got one thing to say, right? He's got several things to say, and he just managed to orchestrate and get all these pieces to fit together into one cohesive puzzle. Even though, right? So,
and it worked because sometimes you're reading a book. The Prince of Nothing books did this to me a few times, but it's pretty common in books where a novel have a bunch of different threads that may or may not be super interconnected, and you get really invested in one, and then it jumps to another one. You don't care about that much. You're like, shit. And you're like almost slogging through it to get back to the good part. But this one, every time it jumped to a different perspective, it pulled me right along with it. And
I don't think there was any of them that I cared more or less about. That there wasn't like, this is the good one, and the other ones I don't care about that part. Right?
The Jahilia story, like the first dreams, that was the one that I found the most compelling. Partly because I'm interested in.
Well, that's the part about the literal title of the book, the Satanic verses, right? So for that reason, that was the most,
Well, also because that one, another way to look at those dreams, because there's like 4 of them, 4 or 5 depending on how you count, because some of them are short or. Not necessarily. Anyway, I'd say that they're all echoes of each other because it's almost the same type of story in the dreams happening over and over again, but in a different era with a different context. But it's the same human lens of the players in the story, like rationalizing the decisions they're making.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have these separate stories that are somehow tied together, either because Gabriel's dreaming them or because they're actually taking place in the same world and there's some minor linkage or, whatever reason.
Yep.
But they all have like characters that line up with each other, right? Like, the biggest one is the 3 or 4 Aishas.
Yep.
Like, it feels like almost every one of the different stories has an Aisha in it, right?
Yep.
And it's like, the same way that like you might read, a normal novel, and it's like, this person in the novel is representing Jesus, even though, right? And it's like, it's an allegory in that sense. Whereas in here, rather than they do have the external, references like, Mahound is Muhammad, but they also have internal ones where it's like, we'll make a character and we'll make another character. Right.
Well, like Hind, the Sultan's wife from Jahalia, and then you've got Hind in London, and those two characters are not the same, but there's a bunch of echoes between the two of them. Like they're tied narratively, but not directly.
Yeah, and then it's not always so blatant with the same name characters, right? Because you've got the angel Gabriel, right? You've got Gabriel with a similar name, right? But Gabriel is, having these wild dreams, and it's sort of like he's receiving by dreaming, he is receiving, I guess, prophecy in these dreams.
And that's what stuck with me the most.
Because the only thing, I still don't know much about the Quran, right? But I tried to do at least some research, right? And the main key thing to know, I think possibly the only thing you really need to know about the Quran to understand this book is that, I'm a Jew, so I know about the Old Testament, right? The 5 books of Moses. Why are they called the 5 books of Moses? Because supposedly, obviously not truly, but supposedly, Moses is walking through the fucking desert, right? after he freed the people from Egypt. And God was like, yo, Moses, write this shit down, right? And so Moses wrote 5 books down, right? And so the Quran is supposedly, there was a dude named Muhammad, and the angel Gabriel was like, yo, Muhammad, write this down, right? And that what he wrote down was the Quran. So in the book, you have Mahound receiving prophecy from Gabriel and not writing it down. Someone else wrote it down for him because he couldn't write. And you've got Gabriel receiving dreams, right, from who knows where.
But
right? And you've got was it one of the Aishas, right, is receiving, prophecy that tells her to go walk into the water.
Yep.
What's that?
Definitely it is very clear that nobody actually made it through that water.
Yeah, obviously.
But when those dreams are happening, and this is where, because not to compare this to all the nerdy stuff we often talk about, but like one of the things we always praised Utena as an anime for was that it worked. Like if you take the allegory at any level or decide which parts to follow, they're still very self-consistent and still tell the same story a different way. And that happens here too, because one reading of those dreams and prophecy is literally the Muhammad or Mahound received prophecy from the angel Gabriel as manifested in the future. And you could have a time thing like the future affects the past or the past affects the future, because it could be the other way around. Modern Gabriel is receiving these dreams from the past in some magical way. But in those sequences, repeatedly, Gabriel keeps like almost noting that he has no power over it, and whoever he's receiving the dream from kind of takes control and speaks the words they want to hear into him, and they come back out of him. Which could imply more that it's 2 different people in 2 different eras who are speaking to a non-existent internal angel to rationalize the decisions they were going to make anyway, because there's multiple points where someone says, like right back to the beginning, the Satanic verses, well, God, the angel told me this, but Satan told me that. And even in that scene, I think Gabriel says something to the reader. So I just remember this line because I made a note about it, something to the effect of, but it was me both times.
Right. Well, okay. So we got to get to that, right? So first of all, this book has some unnamed narrator, right, who is a character.
I would argue on one level that unnamed narrator I thought was the base internal monologue of all humans that people interpret as divine. But I also wondered if it's more magical, the actual angel Gabriel who has been inserting himself or itself into these characters along the way.
Could be. That's what I'm saying. That's what makes it, the kind of book that I like is that, I've been ranting about this constantly over the past year or few, right? Is that there are some works of fiction across all mediums, right? And especially today, the popular ones, the serials on television especially, where they're all about, the only question they ask of the audience is what happens next. And then they answer it, right? And then there's no questioning, right? So I think, a good example would be like those, who's the guy who makes the movies like the...
Who's the guy who makes the movies?
The Inception movie guy and the...
Nolan?
Interstellar, same guy?
Nolan and all them? I'm trying to think of who.
Right? So he creates this wild thing, right?
There's no allegory there.
Right, and then at the end of the movie, he basically explains it, right? He's like, it's like, sure, at the end of Inception, spoilers, right? It's like they cut away before the top stops spinning, if it does. Right?
And some people, I would argue, and I'm going to say something mean, a lot of people mistake not answering that question for being deep.
Right, but... That's not, to me, that's not challenging to the audience, right? It's like, because you're not asking any other questions. You're not asking questions about life, or meaning, or, right? It's like, you don't walk out of there, seeing those movies, like, like thinking, like questioning existence, right? But you look at, we did it 2001 already as a book club, right? It's like, what's the end of 2001? It's like, You could try to explain a little bit, like, okay, so the aliens took him and kept him somewhere or something, but
taught him something,
right? But what does it mean? It's like it's challenge. It's not asking you what happened or what happens next, right? It's challenging, right? Your philosophically, right? You know, what you believe about the short life that you were going to live on this earth, right? And you have to answer it for yourself. They don't tell you what the answer is.
And even to get back to your Inception example, say you try to scratch the surface and dig deeper and ask questions, even if the movie or the work didn't necessarily compel you to. If you go deep on, say, Inception, you'll exhaust all your possibilities and lay out a fairly simple map of ideas and stories. But even now, like thinking about this book and reading it, if you keep trying to line up allegories and like explain things, you can basically go infinitely deep because every angle asks more questions and ties back to other things you read, and radically, diametrically opposed literary interpretations of parts of this book make perfect, consistent sense next to each other in the same story. And
right. Now,
that is
one thing,
craft.
Now, it's one thing to be so abstract, right? That it's like you're like a Mondrian, where it's like I guess Mondrian is still pretty good. But
yeah.
I like him a lot. But it's like, you know, you put like a dot on a painting, and it's like up to people to interpret the dot, right? It's like you barely, you know, it's like it's so wide open, right? That what did you really craft?
Of course, I do remember when we were at the MoMA once, and it was you and me. This was years ago, and there was a big white wall, and there was a little plaque at the bottom. We walk over to it, and the plaque said, "This wall was shot with a pellet on this date at this time." We stood there for a while, looking at the wall, debating whether or not it was really shot, and trying to find the bullet hole.
Sure. But, you know, think about like a Picasso, right? Where it's still abstract, right? But there is still so much there, right? It's not like they're just, you know, lazily making some open-ended thing and being like, haha, it's challenging you, right? It's like, no, it really is.
Well, it grounds you. The challenge and the literary discussion and the introspection are grounded in very specific literary notes, specific facts, specific framing to point you in a direction of inquiry instead of just having an open... Like a completely open inquiry piece of art is almost not materially deeper than a zero inquiry art. The magic is art that guides you into deep inquiry with the fewest pieces necessary to do so.
Right. And so we have this mysterious, you know, narrator, right? Who almost any book written today would at the end of the book reveal with no doubt who the narrator is.
And then Kaiser Soze walked away.
I was 90%, I was expecting, right? Half expecting, I guess, because like, you know, was that at the end of the book, that narrator was going to come in and close it off, right? And that narrator basically stops coming in like 2/3 of the way through, right? I mean, they're still narrating, right? But earlier in the book, there are times where the narrator breaks the fourth wall.
Oh, he's talking to you directly, and he basically says the equivalent of, "Wait till you see what's about to fucking happen." Like he's very,
and that's the narrator is the character who says it was me both times.
Yep.
Right. And there's another important scene, the only time where the narrator actually appears, like. He meets Gabriel, right? He's like on a bed or something. I forget the details. Like Gabriel walks in a room and he's there, and it might have been Chamcha that walks in the room. One of the two characters walks into a room.
I want to point out that it is not that we're just forgetful, because I know, like, Scott, you have a reputation for forgetting the names of characters, and I'm not great about it either, like, to be fair. But in this case, the duality and the sort of flipping of roles is so integral to this book that it is very easy to forget which character did what, because the book is doing that on purpose.
Right. But anyway, one of the main characters, I should look up which one. It's important, like one of the most important scenes, even though it's so short, right? It's like this ridiculously significant, important scene in the book is like a page or two, maybe, right? They go in the room and the dude is there, who's the narrator, clearly. Right, you could just tell somehow, even though it didn't say so, right? And he's like the narrator's trying to like, you know, tell whoever it is, you know, something, right? To like influence them, and he's being challenged. He's basically being asked, like, are you God or are you Satan? Right? It's like the character knows. He's like, which one are you? And he's just sort of like, laughs at him, right? It's like, lol, you don't know which one I am, bro, lol.
Yup. So
right?
my interpretation, my
and
personal.
Then there's another part where the narrator comes back and talks to the reader and is like, "Lol, that dude didn't know which one I was. If I was one of them at all to be, either one, I could have been something. That's right. It's like,
and knowing that this book is partly widely interpreted to be an interrogation of Salman Rushdie's own life and struggles with living between cultures, I'd say that two strong interpretations are that, well, three, if you want to go a fully mystical route. Interpretation number one, it is God, but God isn't good or evil, and it's a coin flipping in the wind.
Yeah.
Like, both of them are God and Satan at the same time.
Actual angel Gabriel works too, right?
Yep.
Works.
I think a compelling one is that is a stand-in for the concept of human consciousness.
Yeah,
all humans, but I want to really elaborate on it. All humans have this sort of, what our consciousness is something that we can only interrogate through ourselves. And I think this work explores that very well, because it is very much, there's a common thread of characters asking themselves questions and making decisions, or often doing something with no introspection, like when some murders happen, and there's a bunch of scenes along the way, or even in the beginning when Gabriel just doesn't do anything when Shams is getting arrested. He doesn't think about not doing anything. The act almost happens like it was predetermined, and then he starts talking to himself or becoming the angel or something, almost just to rationalize and explain why he did what he did. Mm-hmm. Which is a lot that maps pretty well to how human consciousness works, and it would fit the idea that Mahound was Mahound all along. Every character is themselves all along, and
we know for a fact that baseball players swing the bat before they can see, right?
Yep. And thus that character is the innate consciousness that is inside of all humans, because we're all interrogating and interpreting the world through the same flawed shared lens.
Right.
But a third interpretation, and I was poking around.
Okay.
The third one that people
I got 100 more.
But is that is Salman Rushdie himself?
Could be. That's a good one.
Who is God, if in terms of writing the book. And based on what I've read about Salman Rushdie, that really does feel like the kind of thing he would have done but would never admit to. So
maybe. All right. So we got to talk about the title of the book's the Satanic Verses, right? So it's like, what the hell are the Satanic Verses? I didn't know this until I read the book and then looked it up.
And it's almost every religion that has a book has a concept of these apocryphal.
Sure. Right. So here's the deal. Forget the book for a second, right? In Earth, right? Supposedly, right? Muhammad went to Mecca, the place geographically, with his clan of tribe of peoples, right? The earliest Islamic peoples. And in Mecca, there were these other tribes there too. They were already there, right? And those other tribes had other gods they were worshiping, right? What were their names? There were a lot of female gods or goddesses, right? And basically, at first they were kind of chill with Muhammad's people coming to live there, right? Until Muhammad was like, no, we got to do some monotheism here. Get these other gods out of here, right? And then they're like, get out of here, bro, right? We were cool with the polytheism, everyone doing their own thing, right? But we're not cool with you trying to, eliminate our existing traditions in this area, right? And make our people, right, become your way, right? Go live over there instead, right?
And then you've got the pragmatic rulers of this place being like, look, say these other gods are also cool, and we're cool with you, and everything will be fine. And he's like, you know what? Yeah, this will work out. And then immediately he's like, oh, no, that's not going to work.
Yeah, he changes his mind, right? So basically, and then in the book, right, you have these dreams that Gabriel is having of Jahiliya, and it's basically that story retold, right? It's with Mahound instead of Muhammad, right, and whatnot. And basically, what happens is, Islam begins to take over everywhere except Jahiliya / Mecca, right, until it's surrounding, and then Muhammad comes back, right, and defeats the gods that are, or sends his dude to go defeat the gods that are.
And there's a whole undercurrent there of the nature of how movements that are oppressed tend to spread partly because of that oppression. And that comes up both in the beginning and toward the end with all the riots and the trumpet and the fire and all that other stuff. Like that is a thread, and it definitely seems to follow sort of the history of like how religions have spread in the real world.
All right, but so anyway, the thing I want to focus on though, right, these satanic verses, is that, Muhammad receives, right, instructions from, or Mahound receives instructions from the angel Gabriel.
Yep. Or himself, right? Or whatever that is.
So he's like, what should I do? And at first, the narrator, right, is the one delivering the messages, right? So even if the narrator isn't the angel Gabriel, they are still acting the part and delivering the messages to Mahound. And at first tells him, accept, right, the other lady gods, right? And then comes back the second time. It was him both times.
Yeah.
And says, no, monotheism. There's only one God. Allah is the only one. Get them out of here, right? And so, Mahound goes with the second. Mahound decides on his own that the second verse is must have been actually Gabriel, and the first one was Satan, right? Was lying to him and telling him to accept those pagan gods. And here's the thing: I think the key of one of maybe the second most central focus of the book is that those pagan gods happen to all be goddesses, right? That were all the three of them. I think there were three goddesses.
The Hind makes a really good point early in the book, and that theme comes up later because sexism is addressed in these books as well, pretty directly. So we have a bunch of female goddesses. Goddesses have power, but women don't. And now you want to have a god who takes away even that last power that women have from our society?
Yep, exactly, right? And so the satanic verses were the pro-women verses, right? And then you can see, right, the way, it's a commentary, obviously, on the way Islam treats women, which is just obvious, right? We don't need to get into that, right?
Rushdie appears to have said as much as well.
Yeah, but then look at the other characters who are in line, right, with Mahound, Gabriel most of all, right? And the way he treats women in his life. The story starts with a married woman that he cheated with and then left behind, jumping off a building and killing herself.
Yeah, that happens right away.
Right. He's got the
and comically too. The one thing we haven't mentioned, if you haven't read the book and you're just listening to this, the book is laugh out loud funny sometimes. And this is very much intentional, and a lot of people speak to its humor. But she like splats, and there's a whole thing about the splat.
Yep. And then she comes back like on a flying carpet, like
yep, as a ghost, but also an echo. But also, there's that whole. I don't remember much because that happens pretty early, so I don't remember much about it.
She comes back a few times. I think.
Yeah, but they're short. They're really short scenes.
Right. And then when he's in London, there's the Mountaineer Alley, right?
Hallelujah. The name, we haven't talked about all the names yet beyond the few we've mentioned.
Hallelujah Cone, the Mountaineer who climbed Everest and everything, right? And it's like he's mistreating her real bad too, right? Yeah. And then, right, you got there's actually one of the Aishas, right? The one who is, the butterfly one, right? Mm-hmm. Who she is a woman, right? Receiving these prophecies or whatever, supposedly, right? And you have all this, it's all lining up in that way. And then the biggest one is there's the Aisha who is the prostitute, right? The 15-year-old one, right? Which is basically Mahound's wife is. Right. Mahound's, I guess, favorite wife is Aisha, right? And you don't really hear from her. You just sort of know that Mahound's has a wife who's the favorite one, and her name is Aisha. And then there's the whole part where the prostitutes are like the last holdouts in, the area.
Yep. And she names herself basically the same name as Mahound's beautiful wife, and you can read into why that might have happened. Yep. And you see that a lot. There's a lot of
not Bilal, is it Bilal? He's like I guess he's the Chamcha equivalent, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like, the the truth yeller speaker guy he's basically hiding out, right, in the
Yep, and that's where we get all the names.
To be a eunuch, right, and he's hiding out in the prostitute area.
But a lot of the names are very like the names themselves mean something and are pointed, not just tying characters together by having the same names, but like the fact that basically the street rapper who the Sultan basically hires to diss Islam is named Baal. And I think those, right. And in the end of the book, when he's got the flame trumpet, he names that Azrael.
Oh, yeah.
I was a trumpet player. The trumpet part stood out. I was like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. As soon as he was like, I see flame come out of the trumpet, I was like, that's going to be Chekhov's trumpet.
About the trumpet scene.
That's going to be a real flame. That's basically a flamethrower. That's also a metaphor for speaking words that cause Molotovs to get thrown means you might as well have just thrown the Molotov.
Yep. All right. So what other parts of this book should we talk about?
I mean,
I guess the magic lamp, right?
So at the very beginning,
Chekhov's magic lamp.
Yep. And when his dad is like, there's the whole, because it's
Chomsha's dad, right? So Gabriel's family you hear about early in the book, but then basically they're gone, right? He's just sort of giving you his background.
Yep.
Whereas Chomsha's dad is like a significant character, right? Where he has like this weird relationship with the walnut tree, right, and everything.
Well, also his dad, there's definitely, because if we look at this through the lens of more an immigrant story and people who are transitioning between two cultures or caught between two cultures like that, which is one of the primary and most important allegories of this work, to be clear, it is definitely. His dad is a mixed bag because on one hand, his dad is outright abusive in some ways. But on the other hand, his dad is not wrong that the choices he's making to fetishize London are not going to end well for him. But that magic lamp, as soon as you learn that dad won't let him touch the magic lamp until he's older, and I was like, that lamp's coming back. That's Chekhov's lamp. And then it comes back as, well, because of the decisions you made, I'm never going to let you have this lamp. And then it literally is Chekhov's lamp because that's literally the gun that Gabriel uses to kill himself.
Yep.
That was just, I did not expect the lamp to come back in that specific manner because that opens up, you could do a whole podcast just talking about the metaphor of the lamp. Because think about, from Chomsha's perspective, as a naive kid in India who has dreams of going to London and like leaving what he is wrongly and like he considers his home native culture to be bad in some way for a lot of reasons that we could interrogate. And he wants to leave it behind. And the magic lamp is always framed for him.
Like those people who aren't white who, I'm not saying that Chomsha is like white supremacist bad levels, right?
But he definitely elevates
whiteness.
There are a lot
of people who are not white who become white supremacists, right?
Yep.
It's like, they end up believing, and, there's a lot of misogynist women out there, right?
Yep, and with all that,
a woman who's saying, I belong in the kitchen as a baby factory. Like, there are people like that, right? And that's sort of, Chomsha's not at that level but he is sort of like, London is out there colonized, UK is out there colonizing India, right? And he's Indian, and he's like, go London, yeah, colonize me.
He's like, where I live sucks, and they were right to colonize us. And then he gets there, and of course he's not accepted the way that he wants to be. I mean, we see how the police treat him, and it only goes downhill from there. But then he goes back to Bombay, and he doesn't fit in there anymore either, even if he wants to. And I think that is a very common and important story, and that's a lot of what this book is about. Even if you strip away all the magic and everything else that's going on, it's ultimately about that. It's about the insidious and pernicious nature of white supremacy and colonialism, and how it almost converts people from colonized cultures to its cause, but will never actually reward them. In the same way that the magic lamp represented all of his dreams of what it would be like if he got to London and became a Londoner and like joined what he perceived as the modern enlightened world. And in the end, the lamp is just an avenue for suicide. But it's very notable that it is not him who even uses the lamp in the end.
No. All right. There's I mean, we could go on for a very long time, probably for days and days. Is there anything else that's so significant, though, that we really want to mention it, you know?
I did like it stuck with me, one of the early short segments, the Argentinian story, because it was told a little bit differently from the others, because it was, the woman, what was that their name? Like Rosa Diamond?
I barely remember it, this part. I do remember it, that exists, right?
Because I wasn't super clear as I was reading it on what happened.
It was basically, I think it was, meta knowledge, right? He was commenting on the war.
Well, the war, the fact that a bunch of Nazis did move to Argentina, but also how, you have even colonizers who move to the place and almost do the reverse. Like, they appropriate and adopt the culture. Like, you've got the English people coming to Argentina and basically cosplaying as Argentinians and cosplaying their warped perception of Argentinian machismo and masculine honor, and how when the murder happens and the nonsense goes down, all the Argentinians are like, listen, you fucking English people, if you just leave now, we won't bring you to our courts and prosecute you. There's a really important other side of the story of colonialism that sort of really inspects the idea that it never works out in either direction. The appropriation and the infiltration is just as dangerous and toxic as the expropriation and exfiltration.
It said war. I was talking about Falkland Islands War.
Oh, when he's basically a weeb about...
Which, keep in mind, the Falkland Islands was not long before this book was published.
Yep.
Right? It was really close time frame wise.
And there's a whole extra historical context about that war that we don't have time to get into. Yeah. But remember...
It sort of felt like, though, he's got this whole book to work with, and it's like that wasn't anywhere close to the main point of the book, right? Yep. But he just sort of had space to, and was managed to fit in, comments on other things, right?
Yeah.
That were just going on.
Because he throws in, is like, oh yeah, and he was brought with him from England his new ideas from Germany, and then you get a very abstract description of what is obviously a Nazi flag, followed by the wife has her affair on the island that is all white for some reason, and there's no color there, and everything's just white except for the red of the blood from the murder and the red from the Nazi flag. And that is almost Salman Rushdie just hitting you over the head like, yeah, that's where all of this leads, ultimately.
Yep.
So this, since we probably shouldn't go on forever, and also...
We should talk about the pilgrimage deal. That's the
yeah, because that's a whole other thing around the people make their own myths, and it doesn't matter the truth of an event like that. Like, let's say that literally happened. Faithful people would very likely say, and all the pilgrims made it to the other side and survived, even though that is obviously not what happened.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Or they did, but it was in the afterlife. It's like...
Yep. Which, actually, that makes me think, that gets back to the whole concept of the magic lamp. What's your reward for doing what white colonial culture wants you to do? Well, you're gonna die, because your reward is in an afterlife, and the afterlife doesn't exist.
But yeah, so there's this, one of the Aishas, right, is this is poor town in India.
Yep.
Right? And it's or is it India? It's...
Nah.
I couldn't...
I was not clear on that. And I wasn't even clear on when it was set right away.
I couldn't figure out the geography, but clearly they had to cross the water to get to Mecca, right?
Yep. But she basically performed almost like an accidental miracle. Like, she detected the breast cancer. Like, she had an almost like a sort of miracle, and people were kind of on board with her. And then through plausible things that happen, people start to follow her. Obviously, I'm skipping over the details because I don't remember that part of the book super well. I focused on other parts. But
it's weird because it's like a thread they go back to, but there's a large gap where they don't go back to it. So
yeah,
it's there. It goes away from it for a long time, and then towards the end of the book goes back to it until it wraps up. Right?
Yep. But
so it's not like it. A lot of books will I guess sort of evenly, Prince of Nothing, good example of you got three different things going on, and they go 1, 2, 3,
yep.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This book is just like 1, 5, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 1, 2, 5, 3. Right? It's like just there's no like set pattern of like going back and forth between the different, and now it's a dream, and now it's Chamcha again, and now it's whatever.
But it's definitely, that feels like, because the Imam story, like the one making fun of Khomeini, they both definitely, it's almost like an escalation, because people follow Mahound and things happen. People follow Aisha to their just straight up deaths, and people follow the Imam to his ulterior motives. And there's definitely a very clear critique of blind faith in extremism leads to death and misery and ruin, and that is very prominently and explicitly portrayed over and over and over again. Even Shamsa blindly following his idealized internal vision of England leads to ruin.
But I think the thing that I focused on when in the pilgrimage part, right, where this cast of characters that was following the pilgrimage, right, and what each one sort of represented, right? So it was the guy driving the car who was trying to convince them to stop, not go. Right? You had like the people who still believed, but they couldn't manage to walk that far. They got in the car.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, and it's sort of like people were getting in and out of the car, right? And and you're always,
and over time you see like it distills down to the people who are either too blind to what's happening or are too extreme, or they're just in too deep and they can't admit to themselves that maybe they should back out.
Right. And then the car brakes, but it keeps walking anyway. But obviously doesn't walk into the water, right?
Yeah.
It's like they get to the final end. It's like who walks into the water and who doesn't, right? Who doesn't even go to begin with?
Well, because very rarely, like look at the other plots. The person who's leading people to their deaths is rarely the one who suffers the direct consequences that their followers suffer.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she really had nothing to lose, right? She was just really poor person making dolls and selling them to this dude, right? It's like,
Yeah. One other thing I think that we're talking about, it's a scene from the beginning, but it's one of the last notes I had that I wanted to come back to that we didn't discuss. There's this whole, in that police scene, I remember that the police, when they first show up, are all identical and faceless. Like, he can't differentiate them. Like, they are just the concept of police. But then there's a moment when suddenly a bunch of them all have specific faces, and like suddenly he sees them all individually. And remember, when he sees them all, fucking none of them are like English going back to old times. We got Irish people and like all these different people who had immigrated and assimilated in previous eras who have now taken on the roles that the colonial oppressors gave them, basically being the police. And that faceless and then suddenly non-faceless nature comes back time and time again. And that scene was just so directly, like the allegory was hitting you in the face to make sure you don't miss it. Because when they escape the hospital, all the animal people, I remember the one animal person who helps them escape is like, that's the power of these English. They describe you and you become what they described. But when he calls the cops out, there's this great moment where suddenly like the cops kind of stop beating him up and they start to almost fight with each other a little bit. And then they realize what they're doing and they like turn around and unify and then resume beating the shit out of him.
Yeah, the I guess we didn't comment too much about the act, like literally turning into some kind of devil beast, right? And literally having some magical glowing halo, like somehow, if they didn't die in the plane crash, right? It's like nobody's, like all the people who aren't them.
Yeah, the cops are just like, oh, what are you, some kind of goat person now? Like they don't even in any way react to that.
Right. It's like, it's not, even though it's supposed to be taking place in Earth, in London, UK, 1980s, whatever. It's like, if there was a goat person in the 80s, people would have been like, holy shit. Like, this wasn't some P.T. Barnum stuff. This is the real deal, right?
Of course, clearly it is, the allegory is around the people. That is their, like, projected perception of him as a non-white, what they presume to be illegal immigrant.
Yeah. but that it goes away. It's like you would think that that would if that happens in most books, that's a thing that is like the
it goes away. And what was the place called? The Hot Wax Club.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hot Wax, the nightclub. I have a page open where I have the list of names of characters, and then there's the names of places at the bottom.
Yeah. And then, Gabriel's halo, I think, also goes away around at the same time ish.
Well, because eventually the veneer
does it come back? What
I don't think it does, because the veneer of the divine falls away, and what's left is humans dealing with the decisions they have made, because no one's answering your questions but you, and no one's holding you accountable to those questions and the answers and the decisions you make but the people around you.
But it's it's normally, right, it's not like some lazy allegory where the bad guy turns into the devil and the good guy turns into the halo, and it's not the exact opposite either. Right, where it's the bad guy has the halo. Yep. Right, it's
because they flip. It's almost like a coin flipping through the air, and who's quote good or bad or satanic or godly is almost like oscillating, because they're both pulled in opposite directions by the culture they're assimilating into for different reasons. So yeah, this book is absolutely 100% worth reading. If you listened to all this and somehow didn't read the book and just listened to the book club for some reason, I wish I'd read this book sooner. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Gave me a lot to think about. I'm still thinking about it.
I mean, if you when you hear about a legend, I have to say this all the time, right? But it's like this is why I try not to, spend too much time
on new stuff.
Reading.
Yeah. We say with Evangelion, the anime, you might like it, you might hate it, you might hate anime, it doesn't matter. The fact that in the year 2023, people are still talking about it a lot, that means that it's worth figuring out what the deal is.
If there was something that's legendary and famous that you've heard of, it's that's a famous book. It's there's a reason the book got famous.
Yeah. You might not like it. But you should at least know something about it.
It's would I rather watch Citizen Kane or Star Wars? I could watch Star Wars 100 times, right?
Yeah.
But Citizen Kane is famous for reasons, right? It doesn't get famous just by random. It's not like some random movie got picked to be famous. It's not like some random book, right? The book or the movie earned that legendary famousness somehow.
Yep.
Right? And if you go and check it out, you will realize why. It's I can't even say it's I could get, it's like an S tier book, but I can't say that it exceeded expectations because it was such a famous book. I expected to be S tier.
I went in expecting, all right, he's one of the most famous authors of the modern era.
Really like an A tier book. I would have been like, oh, I thought this book was legendary. What's going on?
Yeah.
It's just kind of good.
I'm glad we picked this one instead of the other option, even though I do want to read it, and I will read it at some point, Foucault's Pendulum.
It was decided randomly.
But Foucault's Pendulum, Umberto Eco. Yeah. But one thing I know about Eco's writing is it is not quite as perfectly crafted as Rushdie's.
I mean, I've heard of the other book, and I've heard of Umberto Eco, but I've never... similar. I don't know what the contents of those books are. I don't know anything about the person or anything, so...
Have you ever read...
I have similar high expectations from something that I've heard of and is clearly famous.
Have you ever read, it's not that long, Umberto Eco, he wrote an essay in the 90s titled Fascism. Yeah. And it is, you should read it. It's pretty short, and it is one of the most poignant, concise, and well-written descriptions of what fascism ultimately is that has ever been put to paper. It is a very important essay that I think more people should read. But Umberto Eco's writing is not as, florid and pleasant as Rushdie's. Rushdie is just such a good writer. The words they had a good brain feel as I read them in a way that important classic books for all time tend to have. That
it was definitely a situation where it's what life do you have to live to be able to learn to write like that?
Yeah,
it's what would I have to practice to arrange words in that order?
Yep, because I keep saying poetry and florid because if you haven't read this book yet, the prose is, I'd say, 30% poetry, 70% novel. Just the way it reads.
All right. So I guess I had to pick some other books to read.
Yep. You don't have to pick it today, but if you're ready, I'm ready.
It's going to be as good as this one. No. So wait. So today,
I mean, we picked one of the most famous books of the modern era. So
yeah. So all right. So today is June 1st. We start in the Pride Month.
Yep.
So
Ooh.
I went and I looked around for some, LGBTQ plus fiction.
Good
right.
call.
And so I found out. That there is a famous gay author named Stephen Rowley, right, who is married to a author, Byron Lane, and they both released new books on May 30th, like a couple days ago, right?
Oh, that's great, because Foucault's Pendulum and Satanic Verses came out in the same year. That's why I picked them both as options.
But hold on, here's the problem, right? Is I went and I checked out what the deal with these books are, right? And Stephen Rowley's book, The Celebrants, sounds like it has some potential. Like I felt like I kind of would want to read that book, right?
All right.
Let me read a description of it here. Let me see. Here it is. Okay, so it's been a minute or 5 years since Jordan Vargas last saw his college friends and 28 years since their graduation when their adult lives began. Now Jordan, Jordy, Naomi, Craig, and Marielle, so I guess 5 friends, are at the brink of a new decade, responsibilities of adulthood, right? They still haven't figured out their lives, blah, blah, blah. Every year, they have a reunion in Big Sur, California, where they throw each other living funerals, right? Sort of like a weird friend tradition.
Oh, that's cool.
But this time, right, someone has a secret. Dum dum dum.
Ooh.
That's gonna upend everything, right? So that one sounds like I might want to read it, right? Possibly, right?
All right.
The book by Byron Lane, Big Gay Wedding. I don't feel like I want to read it. It's basically, gay people go back to have a wedding in mom's barn in Louisiana, right? And it's like, all right, I can see where that's going, right? It's a little on the nose, at least based on the description. But that's okay, right?
Is it like a gothic story, or I'm just curious?
It's called Big Gay Wedding. It just came out. If that sounds good to you, go read it, right? I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, me personally, right? I don't want to put 2 choices out there, and one of them is one I don't want written to. So even though it would have been cool to pick the 2 books by the 2 gay married authors that came out on the same day as the 2 picks, I'm going to replace one of them.
Okay, you don't have to replace it today, but
No, so I have a replacement, which is, I guess this book came out a while ago, right? But recently, a Twitter account.
You're gonna pick "This Is How You Lose the Time War."
That's right. So,
God, no, everybody knows about Bigelows Dickolas Wolfwood.
Right. So recently, a Twitter account, Bigelows Dickolas Wolfwood, tweeted about this book that's been out for a while.
Well, I gotta read. I'm gonna pull up the tweet because the tweet was like, I found it. Here's the tweet. I'm reading the entire thing. Read this. Do not look up anything about it. Just read it. It's only like 200 pages. You can download it on Audible. It's only 4 hours. Do it right now. I'm extremely serious.
Right. So there's a book called "This Is How We Lose the Time War."
This is how you lose the time war.
Yeah. And it's real short, just like Bigelows Dickolas said. And it is indeed a lesbian romance book. That's not really a spoiler, right? I already read the whole book because it's so short. But yeah, that's also, an appropriate selection for a Pride Month book club. So you can either choose the book I already read, that's mega popular, or this new book that also seems very popular.
I guess you decided at the end of the last show, so I feel like I should keep that precedent going so we don't hem and haw. I like that idea.
I can't force you to do anything, but
I really want to read "This Is How You Lose the Time War," and I haven't yet, so I think we should do that one.
Okay, good. I already read it. Good. You saved me a lot of work.
All right. Well, I think we should give the listener...
Sorry to the 2 husbands. I want to just, prop your books up again. Stephen Rowley and Byron Lane. The books, The Celebrants and Big Gay Wedding.
I think The Celebrants will return to our selection at some point.
Reading. There you go.
Because I'm going to bring Foucault's Pendulum back at some point in the decisions, but not in
we're going to allow reruns?
I think we can in the decisions if they weren't picked, but
you could keep bringing a book back and keep trying it until.
But I'm going to follow my own precedent in the same way that George Washington set a precedent of just not running for a third term. I am just going to say that I will never bring the same book twice in a row in my decision. There at least has to be some time.
Okay.
So I might bring that back at some point, or I might not.
You can't put it up if it gets chopped down 3 times. That's it. It's dead.
I might go with, if it gets chopped down, the time that's appropriate before you're allowed to bring it up again gets exponentially longer.
Oh, so it's like when you're trying to test to see if the website's up again. It's like every second. All right, every 5 seconds.
Like if Foucault's Pendulum doesn't make it through like 4 book clubs from now, then I'm not going to bring it up again for years.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't make it at that point, I'm just going to bring it up when we're in the retirement home.
All right, so the next book is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which I already got from the library, read, and returned today.
All right, I'm going to follow the Bigulus Dickulus Wolfwood's advice, and I'm not going to learn anything about it. I'm just going to read it. We'll give you a month.
It involves a war, time travel.
I imagine birds.
No.
Okay, because they're on the cover.
I mean, there's not no birds in it, but it does not. It's not about birds. It's just birds on the cover.
There's one pull quote from Madeline Miller, and it just says, "This book has it all." Period.
It does indeed. That is, in a short amount of time, there's all is in there.
All right, I'm game.
All right.
We'll do this. I imagine we'll do this episode, not the next Thursday episode, but the following one, just to give it time for people to find out we did the book club and read the book, but might record it early because it's 200 pages. Like I could read that in an afternoon.
It's very, very fast. I was literally like, actually, I thought it was due today at the library, but it was due next week. But because I thought it was due today, it's like I had 25% of the book left yesterday, and it, like I finished it before dinner. It's just like, it's super, I don't know if it's not Binti short.